And we are so happy to have Ann-Chadwell Humphreys here today with us. We are celebrating the launch of her first book, her poetry collection, An Eclipse and a Butcher, and could not be more pleased to have her perform some poetry and talk to us tonight. We all have a bit of a different event planned. We have some recorded video of other poets performing her work, as well as some that Anne would like to say, and one at the end that I will read for everybody. So if you have any questions, just type them into the chat window and I will voice them for Anne and she can respond. She's really excited to have input from the audience, so please ask anything that you can think of in there. We're going to pause between each one of our little clips from other poets and take questions and have Anne kind of tell us a little bit about the poem. So to give a little bit of a bio for Anne, Anne's family has always had poetry around their home. As a girl in rural Texas, she competed in University Interscholastic League poetry recitation. In college, Anne took honors English. After retirement, Anne started to write through community writing workshops at Richland Library and Shepherd Center of Columbia. Now she takes graduate poetry classes at the University of South Carolina, poetry workshops at Wofford College, and online classes through the University of Iowa, University of Pennsylvania, and Hadley Institute for the Blind. She reads and writes her work using assistive technology. Anne has also been a big part of our Writing in Place conference every year at Hub City. Anne lost her sight as an adult from the genetic disorder retinitis pigmentosa. The process was gradual. In her words, I went from seeing through a hula hoop to donut and then a straw. She prepared with classes in mobility, adaptation to blindness, and assistive technology. She is known as an advanced Apple VoiceOver user. VoiceOver is a standard feature on every Apple device. Now Anne considers blindness a gift. Anne recites her poetry, often accompanied by piano or guitar, for festivals, retreats, award ceremonies, worship services, and in conversations around kitchen tables. Muddy Ford Press selected Anne for their Laureate series to publish her first book of poems. The publisher is Cindy Boyder, the editor is Ed Madden, and the introduction in the book is by Tim Conroy. Anne's career began as an RN in the intensive care nursery. She had an eye for how design could improve quality of care. She studied at Clemson University Health Facility, where Clemson asked her to teach classes part-time, which she did for 2 years. Anne became the first facility planner for the largest hospital in the area. After 9/11, she returned to nursing in the area of clinical trials and earned national credentials in this field. In between, Anne and Kirk started their family. She wanted more flexibility, so she founded Edicon, which provided seminars and keynotes for conferences and workshops. She earned national certification in her field. Her business column, The Right Moves, circulated for 13 years on Night Rider Tribune News until CNN.com asked to publish it. Anne lives in Columbia, South Carolina with her husband, Kirk. Their 2 sons have growing families. Anne, as Gran, composes songs, poems, and stories. She is an avid hiker, birder by ear, poet, and aspires to be genuine. Again, we are so happy to have her here with us tonight. And Anne, did you have a few words you wanted to introduce with?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Jackie's done this a dozen times, so I'm learning from her. But thank all of you for coming. I understand there are at least a dozen people in there with us tonight. And so here's what the lineup will be. I speaking and welcoming you, and then you will hear from Jessica Jacobs, the first poet. And I met Jessica at Hub City Writers Contest workshops a couple of years ago, and she wrote, all 3 of these poets have written quotes for the back of the book. And Nicole's, Jessica's wife, and I, and Jessica, I've enjoyed staying in touch with them on and off. So listen to the power. Jessica's from Asheville and her website is in the chat room, but listen to how she reads this poem.
1 second, let me add that website so if anybody wants to see. And then I'm just going to turn on my screen share real quick, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Oops. 1 second. We have a recording of Jessica reading. Which poem is she reading?
1918 Eclipse, an artist renders the 1918 Eclipse and say the words.
Okay.
And Anne just gave us a beaming smile and welcomed us into the group of glorious women that she was a part of. I see Susan Craig here, and I'm sure there are more here. And I'm just so grateful that we've been able to stay in touch, and I could read her poems, and now that all of you can read her poems thanks to Muddy Ford Press. So I'm going to be reading two poems. I'm going to begin with, and this book is just beautiful. I just want to take this opportunity to say it publicly. It was very hard to select the poem to read. So I'm going to begin with An Artist Renders the 1918 Eclipse. Howard Russell Butler preferred oil and canvas to the physics he studied at Princeton. Earned fluency in the language of pigment, could name all the hues of blue. He commanded a lexicon of motion. Quiver, flare, drag honed from the commissions for a dozen portraits of Andrew Carnegie, a restive subject for 2-hour sittings. That June, while the Great War raged, Butler set his easel on a rural plain in Oregon in the company of scientists and telescopes. Cameras had proven inadequate. They wanted Butler. Everyone readied themselves. Butler chose a blindfold to dark adapt his eyes. At the precise moment an astronomer signaled, Butler's graphite scored his paper. The air moved from the brisk strokes of his sure hand. After 2 minutes, the astronomer warned them. Butler retreated to his impromptu studio on site, blocked out colors and movement on canvas he saw with his eyes. From this, he created paintings which a century later still hold their force. And I had to look this up. I had to look up these beautiful images, which I highly recommend doing, not now, but later. And I found this great quote by the director of the expedition that Butler was on. Who is not interested in the total eclipse of the sun? He who has once seen such an eclipse can never forget it. The slow but graduate obscuration of the sun, the darkness covering the face of the earth, even at noontime, and the glorious sight that meets the eye during the few short minutes of totality. And I was so struck by these words because to me they speak so beautifully to both the poem and to Anne as a writer. With Butler, you have this artist who is able to capture by hand what a camera of his time could not, which is incredible, who trained himself to render with his senses and with the descriptions of other people the world that he could not see. He had that blindfold on with his eclipse. And with Anne, you have this incredible writer whose sight has undergone that same graduate obscuration. But these are the poems that record a poet who sees with her entire being, right? Who sees with more than sight. And this poem in particular, and why I wanted to begin with it, feels like a very personal ars poetica, right? A description of Anne's own stunning process of recall and writing. And it's just a beautiful poem. And I'm just going to read one more brief but equally stunning poem, which to me really indicates where Anne received so much of the strength that you find in these pages. In these lines, you're going to hear a plea for presence and awareness, even in difficult situations when it would be easier to turn away, which we're really being faced with so often right now. And there's also a directive for the speaker to share what she observes with the power of born truth. Say the words. Instructions from my mother. When I die, say the words. Say that I died. Say she died. Say my mother died, not that I passed away, passed on, not that you lost me. I am not lost. I am dead. Say the words. Say that I died. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you so much. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those poems, Anne?
Sure. The Eclipse, but there are 3 Eclipse poems in the book. And I wrote those because the totality came in 2017, came right through Columbia. And we watched it from Sesame State Park on this high sand ridge. And there were 4,500 people in the state park. People lined up to get in the state park. But we had a view to the west and straight up. And it was a private, it's kind of a secret place we found there. And so our city and Muddy Ford Press and Jasper Project created a call for submissions to write about eclipses. And as I was researching eclipses, the vocabulary, I read about the history, and that was 2017 was when ours was, and then the next year would have been the centennial of this one, of which I wrote, and I felt it was worthy of honor, and it was a fascinating story that, if you look back a century ago, what cameras could and could not do, and the fact that they needed someone who knew color, who knew motion, and invited him not just on this particular trip, but many others through the 30s, 20s and 30s. He was trained as a physicist, but he turned out to be a portraitist. So I really like history. There's that background. And then the Say the Words came directly from my mom, who is 90, and my father's 91. They're still living. And I'm one of 5 children. I'm the oldest, and one of my sisters is on. But when my mom gets to the point, and they're anticipating their deaths and have been very kind about it and teach us how to age with dignity. They're never grumpy. They're complimentary. They praise, which is the same thing. But my mom said to me, when I die, say the words. She say that I died. She almost said exactly what I wrote. She said, not passed on, not passed away, and I'm not lost. We lost her. She said, I'm not lost. So in the launch of this book, An Eclipse and a Butcher, she actually read that poem, and she won the Emmy for the performance. Many, many people complimented her in her voice, her 90-year-old voice, reading that poem. Are there any questions?
We don't have any coming up yet.
Okay. All right. The next poet you will hear and see is the incomparable Naomi Shihab Nai. She is the Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, and Jessica's won many, many awards too. And Naomi is the U.S. Young People's Poet Laureate for the United States this year. She travels internationally. I happened to meet her in the hall of her home where I was visiting with her husband. Her husband is a photographer, Michael Nye, and he was putting together a book called My Heart Is Not Blind. And it's portraits of us and essays about those of us who see with more than sight. It's called My Heart Is Not Blind, and it's Trinity University Press. It is a beautiful book. Next time I'll bring the book and I'll show you. Anyway, so I was in the studio with her husband for a full day. My husband was there and a brother was there. And then the next day we came back. had my guide dog, Brago, with me. And we were shooting outside pictures. So there was a portrait taking, and then there were the interviews. He asked me beautiful questions, and then he edited all that down, framed all the pictures alike, and it's a museum show. It's a traveling museum show. It opened at the Whitty Museum a year ago, January, in San Antonio. But as I was getting my picture taken outside, my dad was holding my guide dog seated in lawn chairs, and Naomi came out to, well, I think we met her in the hallway. She had groceries in her arms, but she put those down, and she came out and began speaking with my dad. Now, I couldn't really hear what they were saying. I sensed it. I couldn't see them, but I could sense. He was seated, and she brought a book of her poems to read to him. And that was so moving. Anyway, I asked, we've been in touch on and off, and I'm so grateful that she gave another quote on the back, one of the quotes on the back of the cover, and you will hear her voice. I hope you'll look up all three of these poets. You will hear her voice now read her choice of poems from the book.
For inviting me to be with you all today. What a privilege, what an honor. And I'm so happy about your book. And Jessica, you are truly a stunning reader. Yes. Commenter on poems. I could listen to you all day, and I love your voice. So thank you I just feel very touched to come after you, Jessica. And I felt the same way about the poem, Say the Words, which both of you have mentioned. I felt that it was a poem of a lifetime. It was a poem I had been waiting for all my lifetime, and I had never seen anyone write it before you, Ann. You have done such majestic, gorgeous revelation making in this beautiful book. So thank you, Ed, for all you've done to bring it into being. I'd like to read my comment from the back, if that's okay. I rarely have such an opportunity, but I feel this about all your poems, Ann. I'm in awe of the masterful clarity, the perfectly weighted brevity of Anne Humphrey's poems. There's an immense comfort in her vivid scenes, her people and places so rich in presence, and her clear gaze, a stunning collection. And I picked two of all these poems I love for today. I'm reading first Noble Cause. That's what I need, a noble cause, now that the children stoke their own fires. As for me, I have plowed fields and slopped hogs for worthy causes, registered opinions that vanish like dry ice on lawmaker tallies, served as Sunday school teacher, bazaar co-chair, neighborhood newsletter editor, packaged, stamped, and mailed all that to the next generation, corralled favorite family stories, lassoed photographs into albums, chopped in half household inventory, weighed and measured it into parcels for sons and wives and auctioneers, staked a claim on a smaller home, rode herd on renovations, lay funeral plans in church files, signed contracts on property beneath the pastor's window, surrounded by flowers and friends, boxed up interviews, awards, and newspaper articles, apogees of career orbits, and stored them in the attic. Now everything has its place. Then nothing. No more pencils scratching off lists, nor rhythm and beat of projects to fill my days. After all this, I drive my wagon team, emptied of chores and obligations, to the overlook of an unscheduled life with its broad and frightening plain. Wow. And I just kept saying the word wow over and over again when I first read these poems. And the other poem I would like to share today, and I'd like to mention that the sections of this poem have little stars in between them, which is a particularly appealing device that I love to read in other people's poems and sometimes to work with myself. And you were just so amazing to use them so effectively in the poem called 9 Days. I don't want to hear the house was torn down. I wore my wedding dress there. On her way to work, past pink dogwoods, she saw a horse on the sidewalk. I stand on my head in the corner, discipline for new perspectives. He unwrapped the cloth to polish my glasses to gleam in April's light. The camera crew films a reporter in the storm. Traffic signs fly by. I move my sleeveless dresses to the guest closet and switch for sweaters. I mark my keyboard with dots, place my fingers there, and begin to type. Corsage on her wrist, she covered her smile to hide the gaps in her teeth. She snapped my portrait in fall foliage, said, "There's your funeral picture." Oh, Anne, we celebrate your voice.
Great, thank you so much. So I love these videos, Anne, and your how enthusiastic these fellow poets are just to be a part of your work. So this, she read Noble Cause and 9 Days. Do you want to tell us a little bit about those poems?
Sure. Again, commentary on how they read, how Jessica and Naomi have read, and wait, and you'll hear Margie read, the skill of reading. All right, in 2016, my husband and I decided to downsize after 25 years in the home where we raised our children. And that process was wrenching. And so that's what that's about. You could say just plainly downsizing. And yet I live by lists. There were always lists, and I have people helping me. The high school kids down the block, I paid, and then college kids, and then different church friends would come and help me sort through the photographs. I've been a family story keeper since I was after college. My sister Mary now has that kind enough to accept that job and kind of keep up with the genealogy. So was packing up and all this, and hanging the pictures and all the things you must do when you move into a home, purge your old home. And then suddenly I was in this guest bedroom, and it's like everything was done. And it was such a shock. And I thought, now what am I going to do with myself? I had started taking the poetry class with Nikki Finney. I was able to study under her the fall of 2016. So we moved into this, we're at our home right now, moved into this house the December of 2016. So I had been writing at the Shepherd Center, just community writing classes, and taught by nationally accredited high school teachers. It was fabulous. The class, they were great teachers. The participants had wonderful stories to tell. There were memoir and humor and poetry. I found after writing a while that I got lost in the prose, too many words, Even the memoir, people ask me to write about the book about my guide dog, Brago, a memoir, but it's too many words, I get lost. So I like poetry because it provides boundaries. For me, I write in form a lot. So that's the background of that one. It was curious. The morning of the event, my youngest brother, John, called and said, tell me about this poem, Noble Cause. And I said, well, you tell me what you see in it. And he said, no, you tell me what you see in it. And I said, I'm the oldest sister, I'm the poet, you're supposed to talk. So anyway, I gave him a background. It's curious that he selected that one, picked that one out, and Naomi picked that one out. The 9 days, this is a clever technique. I've not heard this before. Ed Madden was a remarkable editor, remarkable. And we did all this by email, and I have access to the USC Writing Center because I take classes at the university, and so the assistant USC writing director, Christina Zan, was helping me. And so we did this all by email, Ed and Christina and I, but then Christina and I talked. We had a standing appointment. We would talk through some of the edits Ed provided. And a couple of years ago, I took a workshop with Ed and Kwame Dawes given by Allen University. And Kwame Dawes challenged us to write 100 days of haikus, a haiku a day for 100 days. So I took the challenge, and I would send it in, and he would just briefly comment, got it. It didn't make any commentary, but it was something to aim for. So Ed and I did that separately. So Ed looked at my inventory of haiku, and he put them together. And it seems to be an appealing poem. I was not aware of doing that. He also put together 3 histories. You'll see numbers in the book. The 3 histories is a grouping of poems about Camp Sorghum, which is a Union soldiers' POW camp in Colombia, guarded by a teenager. Irish canal diggers, which dug the canal in the city of Columbia in the 1820s around the fault line where the confluence of the Saluda and Broad Rivers make the Congaree. And I honored that. And then there was a new portrait that came out of Harriet Tubman this summer. Early in the winter. And it was of her as a young woman. So I asked friends to describe what she looked like. And they described the blouse and her fingers. She wasn't, but in her 40s, were the other photos of her as an old woman, maybe in black with a kerchief on her head. But this woman it was taken in 1868, 1869, so she had already been running the Underground Railroad, and she worked in South Carolina, came down to Port Royal and led Union troops, the first woman to do that, up the Combahee River to free 700 slaves. The point is, he put those 3 together. He put the 9 haikus together, and then he put another set of poems together. It's a nice technique. So, any questions to this point?
Not so far from the audience. I don't see any in the chat.
That's okay.
Do you want to go ahead? Do you want Margie?
This is pardon?
Go ahead.
This last poet is Margie Wentworth, the newly retired South Carolina Poet Laureate. She served as Poet Laureate for 17 years. She was to write a quote on the back of the book, and now you will hear her read the 2 poems she selected.
Ed, first of all, for putting these books out. Tim's book, which of course is one of my favorites as well, and now Ann's. I mean, it's a really great thing you're doing. And I just wrote in the chat, what a love fest. this is a love fest to such a beautiful woman and beautiful collection. I just want to say something about endorsing her book. You know, you do blurbs for books and maybe get a thank you email. And Anne sent us a gift with a signed copy of her book, and mine is a little crystal that hangs in my kitchen and refracts rainbows all over my house. So I think of her all the time. But I thought, has anyone ever thanked me for doing that? I don't think so. I mean, I just want to say that it really is a reflection of her beautiful spirit, which shines through these poems. When I wrote about the poems, I talked about the wisdom in these poems, and I really learned just so much about being a human being reading this work. And I chose a poem from toward the beginning of the book. The poem is The Virtual Tour, and then another poem at the end of the book, which is, of course, in three different sections. And the sounds in this poem, The Virtual Tour, are so beautiful. There's so much alliteration and assonance. And for those of you who aren't poets, I mean, the combination of sounds, letter sounds across the line, a kind of chiming, that's just gorgeous. And I love reading these poems out loud. So I'll read The Virtual Tour. She counts off 19 steps to the porch, crosses the threshold to plunge into a pool of April sun, planing through the picture window. She feels its warm gold on her thighs. From the voices she knows so well, she hears nuanced tones of their pleasure and pride. They coach her to angle the lens to highlight the red rocker, pie safe, sun self-portrait. The bound carpet leads to the back door and courtyard with blue jays sassing in the sugar maple. She weather vanes north, south, east, west, considers where to hang a hammock. Back inside, she trails the chair rail to the entry, curtsies her goodbyes, unfolds a white cane to tap her way to the mailbox. This poem, is really a window into Anne's daily lived experience, but it is also just such a celebration of the ordinary events of the day, which we value in all poems, I think. It's a gorgeous poem. And I was so pleased that no one else had already wanted to read that one, because it's one of my favorites. And now I'm going to read a poem called The Fallen Pine. And it's on facing a page called Portrait of a Husband. And it's really a love poem. And I think it's also a poem that uses the fallen pine as sort of a metaphor for how we get through all the crises in our lives with our partners. Fallen pine. It is immense. My arms cannot circle it. Last night's downburst snapped its base like a bone. I pose, a weightlifter beneath the trunk. Here, pine borer beetles grind the pulp. We step off its 100 feet with the slow fall of time from its 100 years. Will we have the privilege of a long life? I don't know, but if you fall, I will catch you.
Right, that was beautifully read. Oh. There we go. The video just kept playing. Yes, that was beautifully read. And do you have anything? She said the title of the first poem was The Virtual Tour. I didn't catch the second poem's title.
The Fallen Pine. Fallen Pine is the second one. It's the last one in the book. And I wrote Virtual Tour for National Poetry Month, which Columbia City Poet and the One Columbia and Jasper Project it's in April, and they call up submissions with the theme of a home, because they put the poem, Ed Madden thought this, put the poems in like real estate sign boxes, like a house is for sale, and in that little box you can pull out the flyer. So people would walk around the neighborhood, and then there would be several poems in there, and they were replenished. So I wrote about moving in to this home and showing the home to our parents with another sister with the iPad. And I just found it very meaningful to do that. Ed chose to place it at the end of the first section, for which I'm very grateful. It gives you a sense that I see with more than eyes, but it doesn't play the blind card real heavy initially, and then you ease into it, and there are more poems in which I'll talk sensory inventory. I've developed, last count, 14 senses rather than the normal 5, but the sense of memory, the sense of paying attention, the sense of organization, of orientation. And I have come to believe that blindness is a gift. Now, it took me a long time to say that word, blindness, but I've crossed over and I'm comfortable with it. I've invested a lot. And let me show you, those of you, this is the keyboard I use. It's a Wi-Fi keyboard. You see the bump dots on it? Can you see it, Jackie?
Yes.
So I carry this around, and I have an iPad and another keyboard. And then Apple has this,
Thursday, press home to open.
It's standard on every phone.
Thursday, December 3rd. Press home to Facebook folder.
So it read.
Double tap to open.
That's a,
Voiceover on. Messages.
okay.
Double tap to open.
Sorry. It will read punctuation. I can set it to some punctuation, all punctuation. I can set the speed. I slow it down when I'm listening to dense language like poetry. I don't want to speed that up.
Right.
And the 800 number with Apple, and 24/7, they have senior advisors there. And I don't beta test with Apple, but we're partners. And if I find a glitch, I let them know. And I've learned it's not always me. It can be the software, and they're constantly trying to update it and be respectful of us. So that's the background of that. Now I'm going to recite for you the title poem called An Eclipse and a Butcher. And then a short one after that. And then I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Okay.
An Eclipse and a Butcher. Howard Bryce had a soft spot for our mother. He'd plug wedges in watermelon for our family to taste. He'd draw no good, no sale. Bryce's Mercantile was one of only 2 grocery stores in the county seat, population 397, in the remote Texas Hill Country. Saturdays, our mother, whom people thought to be more beautiful than Jacqueline Kennedy, piled 4 of us into a 58 station wagon, no seatbelts, no air conditioning, to drive 13 miles past sheep and goats, summer camps, and tourist cabins to the tiny market on the courthouse square. When we pulled in, we kids tumbled out to race through the screen door. Not yet 10, I had been entrusted to order our usual 3 pounds of hamburger. As I approached the lighted case, Mr. Bryce sang out, "And how is Miss Ann today?" He asked about the Great White Pyrenees puppy he had given our family. I watched as raw red meat coiled from his grinder, and he swept a quivering pink pile to weigh on a silver scale and wrapped it with white paper and flourished the price with a black wax pen. I thanked him as I had been taught and found our mother with our little brother in her overflowing buggy and joined my sisters at the candy counter. That was July 20th, 1963. On the way out, we asked Mr. Bryce for boxes to make our pinhole projectors. And on the way out, San Antonio papers headlined the President and Mrs. Kennedy's pending trip to Dallas. But on that day, in a gravel lot of a small town's grocer, a family turned its back to the sky to watch the moon slide across the sun. And this next short poem is called A Gift to Myself upon the occasion of my 65th year. Goodbye to self-doubt and second-guessing, the what-ifs, the should-haves, and gone are decisions of little consequence and anything that needs ironing. I give myself permission to ask for help, the sooner, the better, and drop books that no longer hold my attention. I keep in my purse a souvenir button, quote, I may be compelled to face danger, but not fear it, end quote, from the home of Clara Barton. That last poem I wrote to myself for my birthday. I felt freed. I had difficulty with turning 65. I'm 67 now. I had a difficulty. I don't know why, but it was kind of an identity crisis. And my sister Mary and I were walking down towards San Marcos River. And she said, and I was wondering, that broad and frightening plain, you know, and she said, oh, you can do all kinds of things, Ann. And she gave me a wonderful pep talk. And I jumped in the river with my clothes on. It was kind of a baptism or cleansing. I came up and I had my confidence back. But really, when you think about it, why bother with decisions of little consequence? Now, Eclipse and a Butcher is one of the 3 poems that anchor the book. The book opens with a poem called Portrait in Bronze. Later in the book, towards the end, is the 1918 Eclipse, and this is the title poem in the middle of the book. And as I was writing for the Eclipse contest in our city, I remembered that eclipse when we were children. And so I looked it up and saw that it was July 20th, 1963, and then 63. And then I looked at what else was happening in 1963, and people, my mother was a beautiful brunette, like Jackie Kennedy, about the same age. And so I projected, I just put, those of us who were alive then, I remember where I was when Kennedy was shot. But that was July. That was before he was assassinated. And I just somehow linked that with the eclipse. Ed said, maybe you just want to use the word eclipse for the title. And An Eclipse and a Butcher is a distinct title. Mm-hmm. But I respect his opinion, so I sat on it for a week. And with assistance from Christina and other people, we looked up other books that had eclipse in the title. And there were no other books with Eclipse and Butcher in it. So it stands out. And to me, it just felt right. It just felt right. And so after a week, I said, I've made my decision, and here's why. And he said, completely understand that, I respect that decision, that makes sense. Now, what questions? I have many stories to tell, but I want to respond to those of you who are watching. Any commentary, any question you would like to ask me?
Thank you for those beautiful recitations, Anne. That was absolutely amazing. So lucky to have heard you say that. Read those for us. So we have a few comments from your sister Mary. She said, It seemed that Anne was always striving for something big in her life, almost a restlessness, but I feel now she has found her place, and I am so happy for her. She also had a couple of comments as you were reading that she remembers, the memories that you were talking about, and mentioned Howard Bryce's apron, and how it looked and smelled. And then she said, "You should have heard Anne hoop and holler when she jumped in the water. She then swam along with my husband and floated down, and the water was crystal clear and so refreshing."
That was a distinct memory. Okay, I want to show you is that right? I want to show you the cover of the book. And because I live my life with a lot of tactility, so I bought an embosser like the notaries use. And that's how I sign. That's one of the ways I sign the book. I don't know if you can see the emboss, so I can feel it.
Yeah.
And you can buy the books from Hub City Bookstore. One's already been sold, which is nice. You can get it online, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And I offer a book with my signature, with embossed and my signature and personalized message, which I would say to Jackie, to Will, because it gives me a familiarity with the reader. I feel a connection. So far, I've known everybody who've purchased the books, as many as 7 at a time, several 5 at a time, many 3 books at a time. And this is the White Pyrenees puppy that was this is the picture about the age we were when that poem was written, and I'm holding on to the dog with a rope, and my dad took this picture. It was beneath the house where we lived way out in the country on what had been a ranch. And then you'll see 3 of my siblings. The youngest brother had not been born yet. But and my niece, we were kind of struggling with the book cover concept because my wonderful friend Susan Craig was in the process of moving and selling another house, and your head is just like that. But my niece Eleanor is Mary's daughter, one of Mary's daughters, really bright, and it helped me with the website and the Poetry Facebook page. And I just thought, Eleanor will know a concept, and she remembered that photograph, and it was perfect.
That's one of the questions I was going to ask you, Anne, so thank you for telling us about that cover. It's very singular title and cover, so we love having it in the shop because no other book looks just like it. So we have a couple more comments. Would you like me to read them for you?
Yes.
Okay. So Lisa says she had to leave a little bit early, but she said this was a lovely format for the celebration of the book. The poems have been wonderful, and thank you. Laura says, I am so fortunate to have had Anne as my friend for many years. This collection captures her beautiful personality and way of expressing herself. I am so glad others now have the ability to experience Anne through this book.
Hey, Laura Hart.
Mary mentioned that the Great Pyrenees dog's name was Pam, and that you had a wonderful large place for dogs and horses and everything to explore and play. Delia says she loves hearing the background for your poems. And
Delia.
We've had a couple people order the book since we've been talking. So Ruth, thank you.
Yay team!
And Anne did sign and emboss the copies that she sent to us. They say from Anne, I think. Is that right, Anne?
All the best. Maybe.
Yeah, all the best.
Something.
Best Anne. And then we have the little embossment on them. I'm not at the shop right now, or I would show you. But yeah, they are just lovely books, and we have plenty of copies. So if you order through our website or calling us, we can make sure that you get those signed copies. Or call Anne. If you know Anne, she's happy to get you those books. Mary asked if you would tell everyone about Mrs. Butt and how she sent us books every Christmas.
Here, can I talk?
Sure. If that's okay with Ann, she's the boss.
Okay. Yeah.
And
My sister, the three sisters, and then two brothers. I want to respect, how's our time doing, Jackie?
We have about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Well, we grew up on this camp, and it was by the H.E. Butt family, B-U-T-T. They're H.E.B. grocery store chain in Texas. It's huge now. And one of the founders was Mary Hollingsworth Butt, was the wife of Howard Edward Butt, who founded, the son of the founder. And Mrs. Butt was trained as a librarian. So she would come, and so this was a 2,000-acre former ranch that had been turned into a camp, which was available for free for people with churches and schools and inside San Antonio, down to in the downtown San Antonio, and people with mental health issues and all kinds of people. And it's in the hill country of Texas. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. You can look it up, H.E.B. Foundation Camp. Now, would you read, to wrap us up, I asked Jackie to read the last closing poem, which I wrote for the friendship organization of which I'm a member. I mentioned that earlier, as something to honor them and something because I'm a member of it, we could give away as a gift. And they illustrated it. So I've asked Jackie to please read that in closing. And thank you all again for coming. It really means a lot to me. And I thank Hub City for hosting this. You're such innovators.
We were so happy to host this with you, Ann. And I did love the story about Mrs. Butt. Thank you for sharing that, and for Mary for bringing it up. So the poem is Friendship.
Blessing. The friendship blessing.
A friendship blessing. There we go. When friends are gone, let us be your company. When you feel restricted, let us restore you. When you have places to go, let us take you. When you can't see a way, let us make one. When you are reluctant to ask, you can ask us. When you offer yourself, we welcome you. When you want to dance, we will be your partner. When you want to sing, we will play the music.